And when you look at the numbers of refugees, perhaps tens of thousands of refugees drowning in the Mediterranean since the death of Gaddafi, what have you felt watching that on the news?
Yes, of course. We are very saddened by the situation in North Africa and the African Sahel. You see, we had genuine projects for the African nations around the North African region and the Sahel area to actually contain illegal migration and to build national industries and national economies so the African people do not have to risk their lives and die in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. But for all the alternative liberation projects that we had, look what exists now. Complete destruction of the internal structures of African countries, of Libya especially, education system, hospitals, health, everything. And instead of the unified African army, you have the AFRICOM, the American Command in Africa. You have the French force, the G5S in Western Africa. And instead of the African Central Bank, which would have served the refugees and the African nations, you have the French Central Bank. And instead of the gold-based economy, you have the subordination of African economies to the global capitalist machine. It's all part of the same story. Even the internal problems that existed in Libya beforehand, they were exploited because this is what empire does.
Tragic irony that in death Gaddafi succeeded arguably in destabilizing European Union countries because of immigration and the rise of the far right?
People have said that. Gaddafi was also not just a pan-Africanist, he was an internationalist. He really did want peace and tranquility and development and cooperation. That's why he hosted, and he was the head of the European African Summit in 2009 in Libya. He wanted to build up Africa, but he wanted good relations with Europe. He wanted to create a new world order of justice, of peace, of collaboration. But this was so hard for the imperialist capitalist system to digest.
A lot of has been written about the racism involved in the NATO mission in Libya. I mean, you knew Gaddafi, you and other ministers in the Libyan government. What did he say about why he supported Nelson Mandela?
Well, Mandela was called a terrorist by the British government, declared as such by Margaret Thatcher and her ministers, was declared a criminal by many Western diplomats and even intellectuals.
But did he understand his support for Mandela would affect Libya?
Oh, of course, of course. Gaddafi was very honest and transparent with us, people who worked closely with him. And he said this. He said to us, make no mistake, we are being punished for what we did not just for Libya, but for what we did for Africa and many other developing countries around. We are paying the price for supporting Nelson Mandela, for supporting the black race, for supporting real politics of revolution. Gaddafi was happy to fight until his death. He knew he had many ways out. He chose not to go out. He was offered ways out, even by African leaders who visited him during the war. But he said if he goes out, the very ideas he fought for will die. In his death, his ideas will live. And I believe the ideas and the principles and the projects he led will live on and will come back with such power in the future.
You see, you say that, but Joe Biden, of course, is going for the presidency next year, leading a Democrat, friends of Hillary Clinton. What did you feel when you saw Hillary Clinton talk about Gaddafi, far from in those terms, but the fact that basically they killed him?
Hillary Clinton is a war criminal. She knew what was happening in Libya. She understood, and this was revealed in her emails that were leaked by WikiLeaks. She said very clearly that the charges against Gaddafi were at least exaggerated, and that the French were into this because of the Libyan gold, and because of their objection to what Gaddafi was doing in Africa. But she went along with it because she knew that with the collapse of Gaddafi's Libya, they will have, the States and Europe, a greater chance of controlling Africa, which they did. The Americans now have many, many military bases, and they have increased and intensified their dig for gold, for uranium in Niger, for example, for gold in Burkina Faso, and for other natural resources, the Libyan oil, gas. And so the politicians, they are nothing but servants for the machine.